Okay, so what we're going to show you how to do first is remove the seat and the side covers. This is on a steel frame bike. This particular bike is a Kingpin, 2008 Kingpin, but they're basically all the same. Hammer, Jackpot, they're all the same. First thing you got to do is pop your side cover off. Now all you got to do on that is just kind of pull it. And it's got a couple pins, just kind of pull it straight off and it'll pop off. You have these pins here and those pins go in these rubber grommets. So that's all you have to do there. Pull that off. Now, to get your seat off, I'll show you with a flashlight. Up in here is an Allen head bolt. It takes a 6mm Allen socket to get that out. There's one on the other side. So all you got to do is just unbolt that. You pull that little bolt out, you go around and you do basically the exact same thing on the other side. Now this bike has a solo seat. Some of them that have a passenger seat, like a Jackpot, may have a bolt in the back behind, on the passenger seat would be like right here. You'd have a bolt back here that you'd have to undo as well. But on the solo seats, this is all you have to do. So you do the same thing here. Just pop that side cover off. Now you want to be careful on this bolt because your battery terminal's right here, your positive battery terminal. So you want to be careful you don't bang into that. Take that bolt out. And that's all there is to it. You just kind of lift the seat up and it comes right off. Nothing to it. There's your bracket that holds the bolts. Okay, when it's on there, and there's where your bolts go. It's a little easier to see now. But that's all there is to removing the seat. Okay, so now that you have the seat removed, you want to do the bolts for the gas tank. So you have one bolt here in the back, and you have two up in the front. So this one takes an 8mm socket. It'll come right out. Pretty long bolt. Okay, so that bolt comes out. So now the back of the gas tank is actually loose, okay? So the next thing you want to do is go up in the front. And on these bikes, they have this plastic rubber cover right here. That just presses on. You just pull it off. Just like that. Pull that thing off. There's one on each side. So what you're doing is you're getting to this bolt that holds the gas tank. So take that bolt out. Now, some of these, they have a grommet here, this rubber piece. Sometimes that falls out, so if it falls out, it's okay. You can just put it back in later. No big deal. So I'll just go over here and I'll pull this one off. Okay, so now the gas tank is basically loose. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to raise it up, and sometimes this is where you need a helper. You can get a block of wood or something and put it under here. But you want to raise it up and you need to disconnect the fuel lines. So the way you disconnect the fuel line is pull your cheese wedge off on this side, and it just pulls out, just pops right off. It has those clips, you just pop it right off. Now, in behind here, it's kind of hard to see, but in behind here, this is your fuel line. This is your main fuel line. If you look at it, and like I say, it's probably hard to see with this buried in here, but there's two clips on this, and they're green. What you have to do is you have to squeeze those clips together. Once you squeeze those together, you'll kind of hear like a little click, and then that thing will pop right off. So there's two ways you can do it. You can try to do it with your fingers. Sometimes you can get in there and do it. You can do it with a screwdriver and kind of push each one down. I have a set of pliers like this that we use. Makes it a little bit easier because we do so many of them. But I'll try to get the flashlight if I can to help show some light. But what you're going to do is you just want to squeeze those two together, just a little bit, not hard. You hear that little click? And you just pull it right off. It comes right off. Now watch, because gas is going to drip out of there. You don't want to do this on a hot motor, because if you have that gas dripping, you know, you don't want to start a fire. But that's all there is. That pulls that right off. No gas will drip out of it. You know, you can see you'll get a little drip right when you pull it off, but after that it won't run. So even if you have gas in the tank, it's not going to run out. It may just drip a little bit. So the next thing you want to do is you want to try to get the tank up in the air. Okay, so you can see. Now, what I'll do is I'll get a board to put under there. If you have a helper, you just want to hold this tank up like that. Okay, and I'll try to get the flashlight and show you. But you have your wires going up under here. Okay. And right here is your connector. If you can kind of see that. Right there's your connector for your fuel pump. Okay. I'll show you once we get this off how to do this, because it's too hard to see here. But what you do, there's just a little, like a little catcher on there. I'll try to hold the flashlight, but there's just a little catcher on there, and you just have to lift it up. Once you lift that up, you can pull your wire out. Okay, so I lifted that up, and now it's disconnected. You can see it's disconnected there. So you want to kind of feed your main hose here, feed it up through, because you want to be real careful. You don't want to break this nipple off. Now this nipple under here is brass. It's not like a cross country where everybody breaks them. So you just want to kind of feed that up, and at the same time pull back on the gas tank. You don't want to raise it really high, because you'll hit it into the triple tree and you will dent your gas tank. So you just want to kind of pull that off, okay, and then lift that up a little bit. Now your line's caught, okay, or our line's caught, so you have to be real careful. Like I said, you want to try to fish this out and be careful. So we get the line out, okay. Now you also have a couple vacuum lines here. You can either disconnect them up on the gas tank or down on the side. Don't let it fall. They are these two lines right here. They're just pushed in. There's nothing fancy. You just pull them out. And they're different sizes, so you don't have to worry. If you can see, one's big, one's small. You don't have to worry about it. That's basically everything to getting the tank loose. Now you just kind of pull it off, and voila, your gas tank's off. You can see the line just drips a little bit. You can put a rag around it, no big deal, nothing runs out. And I'll try to show you that connector. Up here, this is the connector we were using for the fuel pump. What you have to do is when the other piece is in there, this little flap right here, you just need to lift this up like that. Just lift it up, and when you lift that up, the connector will pull right out. It's just a little lock, little catch right there. So when it's together, just lift that catch, pull it apart, and it comes right apart. That's all there is to taking the gas tank off. Okay, so one of the first things we have to do in putting these torque tubes on is we have to get the throttle body out of here. And this is the throttle body. You would normally think you want to take the airbox off first, but you don't. You have to get the throttle body out of there. Now Lloyds gives you some directions in this, and we're just going to change them up a little bit. But we have to replace the idle air valve, or put the adjustable idle air valve, and it goes down in here. So what we're going to do, we're going to kind of pull this stuff out of the way just so we can get in there, but it'll also help us get to the bolts. So this bracket is real easy to take off. You just have a couple bolts here, 5mm bolts. The one thing you want to do is this wire connector here. All you have to do is on the top, just kind of push that down and jiggle it off. And that connector will come right off. So this little tab right here, you just want to push that down, push it down and pull it off, and that'll pull that off. Kind of gets it out of the way. You got your bolts here. There's one back in here. It's a little bit harder to get to. They're kind of hard to see with the camera because they're tucked down in there, but you're going to see there's 4 bolts. If you just look at that bracket, you'll see right where they are. There's one more up here. Now that those 3 are loose, you can kind of twist this bracket a little bit, move it around so you can get your socket in there. It does make it a little bit easier. You don't want to really bend it, but you can kind of push it out of the way a little bit. Just makes it a little bit easier to get in there and get that. Okay, so now this bracket is loose with the exception of the vacuum hoses that are on here. Now, the one way you can do those is just get a screwdriver, and hopefully you can see here, you just kind of push those hoses off a little bit. They're just stuck on there. Just kind of pull and work, and there's 3 of them, so you want to just kind of work them off. Try not to tear them. Okay, hopefully you can see that there. Right here, you just get those off. There we go. Okay, and you can just kind of let this sit out of the way. If you want this little connector right here, you can get that off of there and take this whole thing out of the way. The way you do that is on the back right here. You just squeeze those little tabs in. Sometimes you can do it with your fingers, sometimes you need pliers. Just use a screwdriver and kind of push it in. And it'll push right off. Like I say, right here you can see that it's just like an arrowhead. You just squeeze these together and it'll pop out. So that way you get this stuff out of the way here. Kind of tuck that down out of the way. And what we have to try to get to is we have to get to these bolts here. There's 1 bolt here and 1 bolt here. That's what holds the throttle body to the airbox. That's what holds everything together. It's the same thing on the other side. We'll go around and show you the other side how to do that when we get there, but that's the first step there. So what you want to try to do, and this is, it's kind of hard here, you want to get up into these bolts and get those bolts out. So we'll come back here in a second and show you how to do that. Okay, so I zoomed in here for you to try to see this a little bit better. The bolts we're trying to get is this one here and this one over here. Okay, couple things. These are a real pain to get to. The one thing I use is a really long Allen socket. It's a real big socket. It's got the wobble end on it so I can reach in there better. One thing you can do is you can disconnect this sensor here and get that out of the way. Sometimes it's easier to just take some stuff out of the way to get to what you want than it is to struggle. So this little tab right here, you want to push on that tab. Push on that and jiggle the wire out. And it'll come right off. So you get that out of the way. Again, kind of tuck that down, and you'll see you can kind of weasel this socket up in there. Okay? And then I have another long extension that I hook on there. And you can get that bolt out fairly easy. Now, if you only have like a single regular Allen wrench, you're going to have a struggle because that's kind of hard to get to. But basically, you do that, you can get that bolt to come out fairly easy. And you're going to make sure you save these bolts. We're going to use them again. The same with this. What that wobble does, I think some of my other videos I showed you this ball end. What that does, that allows you to put the socket in the bolt and wobble it around and still get you know, an angle on the bolt where you can get it out. So it's a really handy tool in some of these hard to get to spots. So we just kind of get that in there again. Hook our ratchet extension up. And you can see that. That'll come out. And this one's a bit harder because you just can't get the angle you want to get onto it there. I try to angle as best I can. There it goes. So you would see, if you tried to do this with a regular Allen wrench, you would see how much of a pain that really is. And that bolt just barely will clear when it comes out. Just kind of finagle it down. Hits on everything. What it is it's kind of hard to see, but it's hitting on this sensor right here. So we got the bolt loose. So these two bolts are out. So now what we have to do is we have to go on the other side. The one other thing I'll show you, a pair of cutters here, is up here on where the throttles go. Okay, right up here, this is your throttle cables. They actually want you to disconnect that. I don't really like doing that. You need to disconnect it here anyway. So you can just take this zip tie, break that zip tie loose so your cables are loose. Now when you go to pull this out from the side here, this will come out and you won't have to mess with the cable since it's already off. So we'll go and we'll show you what to do on the other side. If you can get in here and see this any better, here's our bolt we just took out right here. It's kind of hanging in there. The other one's out. The vacuum hoses are right here that we moved off of that fuel sensor there. This is all disconnected and just kind of sitting there out of the way. So we'll go on the other side and show you what to do there. Okay, so the first thing you're going to do here is take your cheese wedge off. You're going to do the same thing. Pull that right off. And again, this is just what I consider a little bit easier to get into stuff. You can try to get under here and get over here and do all that. Just take this out of the way. It's pretty easy. One thing you can do, just disconnect the coil wires. Now you're going to want to keep in mind where they went. That the front cylinder goes on the bottom and the rear cylinder goes on the top. You don't want to mix those up. Bike won't run real great without having them right. You just kind of jiggle these, twist them, pull them, and they do stick. These factory ones will stick pretty good. Kind of give them a little twist and you'll just pull them right out. That way it gets them out of the way. Now we're going to do kind of the same thing. This has, on this bracket, you have some bolts down in here. You have bolts over on this side. These are a little bit easier to get to than the other side. So I'll show you with the long wobble socket how to get in there and get those. But it's just go in and loosen them. Like you see, these are a lot easier to get to than the other side. Basically takes you just a couple minutes to get these off, and then you can get in to the other bolts and stuff just a little bit easier. Again, this is just simply to get into the job, to do it easier. So the last thing you want to do is get in there and start prying and cutting wires because they're in the way, getting frustrated. Working on your bike's supposed to be fun, right? That's what they tell me. Okay, so we're the last bolt. And be careful, because once you take that bolt out, this whole coil bracket, ignition, and everything will fall down. So take that bolt out and just hang on to it. Okay, now again, you can kind of let this hang. It's much easier to just disconnect this stuff. Pull that tab, pull that wire out. This is your ignition. Just pull this little tab right here, push that down, pull that apart, and your whole coil assembly will come off. So now you can see up in here, these wires are kind of in the way, so they're just stuck up on this tab right here. We just got to kind of pull them down, jiggle them down off of there. There you go. You can pull that down. So now you can see these bolts. You got the one bolt here and the one bolt here. The other thing that you can see is this vacuum right here we're not going to use right now. So that is actually part of the vacuum hoses that we took off on the other side. So go ahead and pull that off. And we can kind of pull that down out of the way. Your sensor here, get that out of the way so you can see. Your sensor here, push in on this part right here, pull it down. Very easily. And you really can, if you start saying, oh my goodness, I got sensors disconnected everywhere. They only go on one place. When you put this up, that connector will only connect to one spot. They won't go other spots. You can kind of see here that they're completely different. So you really can't screw them up. If you get lost, it's not, you can figure out what you're doing. Way back in here, if you can see, there's another vacuum. You want to kind of pull that one off. That one's a little bit harder to get to. You may need a screwdriver to reach in there and kind of pry that back. So you want to just get in there and just get right on the edge of that and just start working it. You don't want to completely pry it. You want to just kind of push that rubber off, and you'll see it start working its way off. And then just work it off at the top, the bottom, on the sides, and just keep working all the way around. Just be really careful. Kind of use that as an extra finger, and you'll see that right here is what we just took off. So you get that out of the way. Now you can see your bolts right there, plain as anything to get out. Again, we're going to use our long socket. You can see you can just kind of get it up through underneath. Real easy to get to on both of them. This one here is a little bit harder. It's a little bit more of an angle, but you can get it. You just gotta, what's the problem on this one is this clamp for the rubber tube right here. That clamp is in my way, so I may have to move that clamp. I'll try to get it out on an angle there. If not, if your clamp's in the way, you're gonna have to loosen that clamp up and spin it so you can get to it. Okay, there's that bolt. I'm going to try to do this one. Yeah, it's coming. So I got just enough angle on it. Now, without this ball wobble end, you would never get that. Okay, so if something like this, if you're going to try it yourself, go pick up yourself a set of these, Harbor Freight, Napa, AutoZone, anything. And the fact that it's the long one makes this much easier. Kind of actually use it like almost as a screwdriver. Reaches up in there. So there you can see that bolt coming out now. Okay, so it's loose now. So take that bolt out, and it's basically doing the same thing as the other side. You can see this side. It comes down so far and it hits the clamp. That's what's happening on the other side. So the throttle body in here now is now loose, okay? It's not enough that we can really get it out yet, but that bolt is up through there still. So we are gonna have to move that clamp. I'm going to have to spin that clamp out of the way. Just loosen that clamp. It's just a regular hose clamp, because that bolt has to drop down and come out of there. See, we just scooch that a little bit, and then that bolt will come out. So once that's out, now you can see how much better this thing moves. Now, since it won't push out from the other side yet, that is because that other bolt is still on the other side. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go around, I'm going to get that bolt out of there, and then we'll come back. Okay, so the last thing we need to do is up in the top here, and it's kind of hard to hold this and show you, but if you see that vacuum right there with the bolt like stuck in the end, that has to come off of the airbox as well. You can, or off of the throttle body. You can do it later, but it's just easier. Just hook your screwdriver and pull that off. That way nothing's hanging out when you're doing this. Just pull that off. There you go. So now it's off right here. So now that that's out of the way, you should be able to basically pull this out. Now, it's going to be kind of stuck on some things, and you kind of have to jiggle it. But for the most part, it should just kind of pull out of there. This is really hard to do holding the camera, so I'm going to try to lift up on the airbox a little bit and get it to come out one-handed. If I can do this one-handed, you can do it yourself. Maybe I can't do it one-handed. Most times I have a helper with a camera. Okay, so here's what the problem is, and this is why it's a good idea to check. If you see that sensor right there, that sensor is hitting on the rubber boot, if you can see that right there. So what we have to do, we have to be careful that we don't break that off. So all we need to do is pry up on this airbox a little bit and get us a little bit more room. This ain't working holding the camera. We'll pry up on that airbox and just pull this right out. And there we go. Comes right out. So that sensor right there was what was catching. So this is out of there now. So you can just let this sit to the side. The reason I don't like to take these throttle cables off right here is because then you have to readjust everything. And that could be a pain for a lot of people. Just leave it hooked up. Just disconnect them from the airbox and set this aside, and you don't have to even mess with that now. Okay, so what you have up here now is you have the airbox and you have the tubes inside. Okay, so what you don't want to do is you don't want to drop stuff down in there. So you can take like a sandwich bag, a couple rags, whatever, and you just want to block that off so nothing goes down in those holes. Really important, like big important exclamation point. Don't drop anything down in there. That's a direct shot into the motor. That's the intake valves of the motor. So like I say, sandwich bag with a rubber band around there. You can stuff some rags in there, whatever you want to do. Because what we have to do, we have to take this whole airbox, this whole section here, we have to get that out of there. There's no way to get that out of there without destroying it. You have to cut it. Lloyd's Directions gives you a couple, like a way to put like a saw, like a wire saw in there and cut it. It's really whatever you have. If you have a hacksaw blade, if you have an air hacksaw, whatever, you want to cut this out of here. You need to get it all the way out of there, and you don't want all the shavings going down in these tubes. Okay, that's why you cover that off. So the first step's doing a couple things here. You have to get this vacuum off the back. Pull that off. Now you're saying, oh, it's loose, it'll come out. This box will not come out unless the engine's out. You have to cut it apart. So you can look at it and cut it where you think it's best. We're just going to kind of start cutting it in pieces. The one thing really, really important, make sure you get all these wires out of the way. Okay, they're just kind of clipped on right here. You can pull this stuff out of the way. You don't want to hit any of this with your saw. Move all your wires to the outside of the frame. If you want to put masking tape over them or whatever, go ahead and do that if you feel safer doing that. Just get everything out of there. All this stuff has to come out. The box, all this. So I'm going to start cutting and then I'll come back in a minute and show you where we're at. Okay, so one thing I want to do before you start cutting into that air box is make sure you take your air filter out. If you have you know, a nice air filter in there, make sure you take it out so you don't accidentally cut through it. You'll never be able to sell it, you know, if it's a good one or you want to use it over. You just take that Phillips screw out real easy. This lid just pulls off, nothing to it. In here is the filter. You just kind of get a hold of it here, kind of pull it out, and it comes right out. So that's your filter. So you want to take that out and leave it out. That way you can, when you're cutting in here, you have a little bit of room to get in there and cut without cutting through the filter if you accidentally do that. So just wanted to show you that little thing before we get going. Okay, so now we're ready to start cutting the air box up. Now, there really isn't an easy way to do this. Lloyd gives you in his instructions a little wire saw type thing that works well. Just about anything you can use, a hacksaw that you can get in there, a Dremel. A Dremel's probably going to take you forever, but whatever you can get in there to cut this out, you just kind of got to start doing it in pieces and work your way out. There's no real simple way that I've ever seen. I use an air hacksaw right here. Get it at Harbor Freight. I think they're like 15 or 20 bucks. It's not the greatest thing. It doesn't have the most power, but it will get through something like this. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to start kind of cutting this in pieces, and then I'll shut the camera off and I'll come back because this is going to take a while and I don't want to bore you with just sitting here cutting. But what you basically do, and make sure when you're cutting, make sure behind there's nothing, you know, you're not cutting into wires. Okay, so hopefully you can see a lot of the pieces are already cut out. What I did, I basically cut the wings out. The side pieces here kind of went up here. I cut that off. I cut the other side piece. This here is where the air filter went. So I cut that out and I cut some of the stuff out in the top. So get that all out of the way. And now you can kind of finagle this and get that air box right out. So you can kind of see, you know, how I cut it. That's inside tubes, and you can see your air filter would have sat kind of right in here. So that's what I did. I cut those wings off as best as I could to get stuff out of the way. Now you can see down in here, you can see what everything looks like without the air filter or the air box. There's our rags. So much easier to get to everything now. Okay, so the next thing we're going to want to do is take some air, if you have air, and blow all this dust off. Even if you have to use your mouth, blow that dust off. Get all that out of there, off of these rags before you pull those rags out, because you don't want any of that plastic shavings going down in there. So I'm going to do all that and then I'll come right back. Okay, so the next thing we have to do is we have to do this idle air valve stuff. If you read in the directions that Lloyd gives you, they're pretty good, but they're really confusing on what you have to do. So I'm going to kind of make this a little bit simpler for you. This is the vacuum tubes that we took off of the idle air control motor. Now if you read in the directions, you'll see IAC and IAV. The IAC is the idle air control. That's the part that goes on here. That's the factory part. The IAV is the idle air valve. That's this part from Lloyd's. This comes with the kit. So what we have to do is we have to kind of put this in line here, and I'm going to show you how to do that. It's real simple. You need a razor knife, and what you're going to do is these vacuum tubes are all held together with that little strip in between. You have to cut them apart. So just take your razor blade and cut that apart. Kind of remember which side they go on too, because you do have to reuse them. So you're going to cut that apart. Okay. The next thing you're going to do is up here on this plastic piece up here, we're going to cut about a 1/2 inch of that off. Okay. So just cut about a 1/2 inch of that off. What we're going to do up there is we're going to put this air filter. It comes with the kit and a hose clamp. So just slide that over that. Slide it down just a little bit, make sure it's on there, and then just tighten up your clamp. You don't want to go too much with that clamp because you'll crush it. Just get it so it kind of helps hold that. Make sure you pull it. If you pull it and it's coming off, you didn't put the clamp down far enough. So make sure you get that, in a good spot, that when you tighten it up it won't come off. Pull on it now and it won't come off. Okay, so what you want to do is you want to keep this in this position, just like that, with this standing up. This last piece of rubber on here, you're going to cut that off. Sometimes it'll pull off, sometimes you have to cut it. This one will pull, just kind of twist it, it comes right off. So you don't want that. Okay. Now what we're going to do, we're going to take our heat shrink tubing and just put that on there, slide that up there, out of the way. Take your idle valve. Now you want to put it on just like this, so the valve, the adjuster part, is down. And all that does is, I don't know if you can kind of see down in here, but in here, this is just a screw that goes up in there and it blocks the passageway of air off. So if you screw it in, it restricts it. If you screw it out, it makes it more free-flowing. So that's all this valve really does. So what you're going to do is you're just going to take this and put it right in here. You're going to make sure this screw is down when you're holding it like this. That screw needs to be down. You're going to take your heat shrink, just going to put it right over like that. If you ever use heat shrink, you use a heat gun, a cigarette lighter will work. You have to be careful with the flame. But use a heat gun, a hair dryer, anything you got that'll heat this up. And you'll just see it like it's called, heat shrink. It shrinks around there once you put heat to it. You don't want to go overboard because you can melt it. Okay, so that's all there is to putting this together. Again, we're going to use these vacuums. We're going to put them back on. So kind of remember how they were. Easy, the one with the T was in the back of the motor, towards the rear tire. It was the back. So that's all there is to converting this over. Now, what we do with this, I'll show you. This is your idle air control motor. This is that cheese wedge bracket that we took off. What's going to happen is when we put everything together, this has some little O-rings on here. Now you might want to put a little bit of oil, a little bit of spit, whatever, just to get it to go in there. But it's going to just go in there, and you're not going to see this when I have it on the bike. You won't be able to see this. That just pushes in there just like that. That's all you're going to do. And then when you need to adjust it, you just kind of reach up underneath and you turn the screw. But that's all there is. And then these vacuum hoses will just be, we'll put them back on. They would go on there just like this, the way everything came apart. And then this just kind of tucks up between the cylinders. You have the cylinders of the motor like this. That just kind of tucks up between there. So that's what those instructions are telling you to do in the paper. Real easy. If you read that, it's pretty confusing, but I just showed you how easy that is. So that's the one next step you're going to need to do. Okay, so now the one thing we're going to show you how to do here is putting the fuel tuner on. This is the VFC sold by Lloyd. If you do it right now, it's extremely easy. So if you're going to put the fuel tuner in, and it's something they really recommend with the torque tubes, you want to do it now, and I'll show you how easy this is. If you don't do it now, you're going to wish you did. What we have to do is we have injector wires, okay? I'll try to show you here. You have an injector right here with this red clip, and you have one in the back. This is for the front cylinder. This is for the rear cylinder right here. If you look at these injectors, you have this red clip right here. That's like a lock. Okay, what you have to do is you have to catch that lock and lift it up. You have to unlock it. Okay, you need to do that on both cylinders. Oh, and it's not hard, you just lift it up. Once you lift that up, there's a tab right here. You're going to push this tab, and if you can see me doing it, you just push that tab, and once you push that, the injector will come right off. Okay, so you want to do that on both of them. Just push that in. The back one here is a little bit harder because it's hard to get your fingers in there, so you can use a screwdriver. There we go. Once you get it, it'll come right off. And you just have to be careful. You don't want to break this stuff. It's something you can get frustrated on real easy. Now, on the VFC, you have the wiring harness. Looks a little intimidating. It's actually very easy. If you look, you can kind of peel this back, you'll see you have a yellow wire, a red wire, a green wire, a red wire. The yellow wire connector stuff goes on the front cylinder. The green goes on the back. So you can see it's just the same as what we just took off. It's a connector with a lock. You're going to put this on the injector and the little pigtail. You're going to connect the factory wire into there. So it's just kind of like a little jumper. So you want to route this stuff, you know, so it's out of the way of everything. So the first thing we're going to do, get my light so you can see here. You're just going to push this on. Push it on, push the lock down, and now it's on tight. That's all you need to do. It's that simple. You're going to take your other wire, your little pigtail, your little jumper, and you're going to put the factory connector in there. Push it together, push your lock down, and now that one's in. So that's all you need to do there. You're going to do the exact same thing on the back. And again, it's a little bit harder to get in there, but push it down. Make sure your lock goes down. If the lock's not going down, it's because you didn't get it on there all the way. Like I say, this one is a little bit harder to do. Put your jumper pigtail in. There you go. Now, that's all you need to do. If you want to kind of route this wire, you don't have to do it right now because we're going to still be putting stuff on. But you just want to kind of get this so it is out of the way. And where you're going to mount this, a lot of guys will put it right under the seat. Other guys kind of mount it down here on the battery side cover. So it's really where you want to put it on the side cover. You're going to see it, but it's easier to adjust. A lot of guys, like I say, just kind of tuck it right up under here, up under the seat. So it's out of the way. So it's really whatever you want to do. If you're one of those guys that you're going to sit here and play with this all the time and keep adjusting, you probably want to leave it out. If you're going to set it and never touch it again, it's probably a better idea to put it under the seat. So that's all there is to putting the fuel tuner on. We'll hook the rest of it up later as we go, but I just wanted to show you to do that now before you put the throttle body and everything on. It's so easy. Once that stuff's on there, it's really hard to get to those connectors. So the next thing we'll do is we'll start putting the throttle bodies back together. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put the throttle body in. So make sure you have all your wires out of the way. Make sure this is clean. Okay, this surface is clean. The O-rings in there look okay. The boots look okay. Make sure everything looks good. Make sure the bottom of your throttle body is clean. So you're just going to do just like you did taking it out. You're going to stick that through there. A lot easier now without the airbox on top. And then what we're going to do is the torque tubes are going to just kind of sit on there like that. So first thing we have to do is we have to put a bead of silicone on the bottom of here so it seals. So recommend, a Permatex silicone. And you just want a real thin bead on there. This is not something, you don't want it gooped all over. Make sure you get it kind of as even as you can. Because you don't want to have an air leak here. If you have an air leak here, it won't run right. You'll have a vacuum leak. Okay. So once you get that, you want to kind of be careful so you don't slop the stuff all over, but get it kind of where it goes, and it'll sort of stick there. Okay, and then you just take your bolts, and you want to put your bolts back up through. This is a little bit of a pain because you have to line it up through the rubber boot, and then you have to go through the throttle body, and then you have to go into the torque tube. And you just want to get the bolt started finger tight. You don't want to really go any more than that. Because you want to make sure you get them all in first. And the ones on this side again are the, they were the hardest coming out, so they're the hardest going in. And if you look down through the top here, you can see it when it's lined up. You can see right through the hole. It's kind of hard to start getting it spinning because you just don't have the room with your hand. So get them in there. Make sure sometimes you get them going and you think they're in and they're not. They fall out. So give them, get them going a little bit so that they're in there. Okay, so we got those halfway in there. I just come and do the same on this side. You can see underneath here a little bit better what I'm doing. You're just going to get that in there, and since the other side's lined up, this should go halfway easy. You may have to jiggle it just a little bit because it's in rubber. And that's another reason why you don't want to completely tighten them up, because then you wouldn't get them in. Okay, so that one started. Do the same thing here. A little bit shorter extension so I can get in there. And you can see again why it's so valuable to have one of these long wobble sockets. With an Allen wrench, you'd be here forever. So just get it down until it starts to pull together right here. What I'm looking for is right here between the throttle body and the spacer. You want to just make sure it touches and it just starts to grab. Then you want to stop. That way you can do them all even. You don't want to start pulling stuff too tight. Do the other one. And then it just starts to pull there. So now we'll go on the other side and we'll tighten that side up. And again, this side, you can kind of see in there, this side is much harder to get in there. Again, that one just stopped. Now we're going to try to get in here to this one. You can see this one, I can barely get a turn on it. Okay, it looks like I'm pretty much out of the reach that I can get it. So I'm going to have to get a different socket or an Allen wrench because I just can't get this out of there. I just cannot get on there very easy. Let me try a different angle here. A little bit more. There we go. Just got to try different angles. Okay, now you want to tighten that up just enough. You don't want to go overboard. Go back and snug this one up. The other side to snug it up. For the most part, that's all there is to putting the torque tubes on. All we're going to start to do now is start to finish hooking up vacuum lines and the wiring and put the coil back on and put the air control back on. The one thing don't forget was we loosened up this clamp here. Want to make sure you tighten that clamp back up. It's real easy to forget that because we loosened it to get that bolt out of the way, if you remember, to get that bolt down. So make sure you tighten that clamp back up. So that's all there is to putting the torque tubes on. They're on now. So like I say, you can also see how it would have been harder to put the injector wire on down here for the VFC. It's a lot harder now that that stuff is on there. So the last thing we're going to do is put the filters on here, but now, like I said, we're going to start hooking up some of this coil stuff. What I like to do, I like to hook up the other side first, the idle air control side first, because if you have to fish stuff through, you can actually kind of get to some of this from the back here. So So we'll get that, and we'll start hooking that up. Okay, so we got our idle control. We want to make sure everything is put back here. We have this one little screw we have to put back in. We have to hook that sensor back up. Almost lost the screw here. We took this kind of loose so we could get that back bolt in the throttle body. Now, the one thing you might want to do now, just as a check, do your throttle and make sure everything works, nothing's sticking. Because if it's something sticking, you did something wrong. Everything should work perfect. You shouldn't have any problem, but just in case, now's the time to check. So we want to hook the sensor that we took off. Put the connector back on. And remember, like I said, you really can't goof these up. They only go one way. Make sure you hear that little click. So that's on. Everything's good. So this, you can do it two ways. You can kind of feed it through now. You can pull this out, get this mounted up. This is just going to kind of go, you know, do a little trial and error fit here and get that to go through there. Got to kind of fish it. It might be easier to fish it through the other side. Like that. That's why I say it's easier to leave that stuff off on the other side. These vacuum hoses, you know, that came out roughly like that. So you want to fish it through the same way. Just kind of fish it through there. And you know it hooked up in the back here. So you want to keep your wires out of the way, and you want to connect this back up where it went in the back of the throttle body. Push that on there. Then that gives you an idea here where you need to be with everything. Same with this one. Kind of put it through there. Hook it on the front of the throttle body. And like I say, this is much easier to do without an airbox in here now. So that kind of goes in there. So you have your two hoses, there and there, and you have your idle air. So this is a little bit, you got to kind of finagle everything here to get this stuff on, but try to get it, if you get it started, you can use your fingers, you can use needle nose pliers, whatever. Just get that pushed on. I don't know if you can kind of see what I'm doing here. But we just push that one on. We're going to take the idle air and we're going to slide it in there. I'm going to kind of do it from the other side. This is one of those things, if you have a helper, they can help hold this stuff while you're pushing stuff around and pieces are falling out, and just helps to hold this. I'm going to put this other vacuum hose on first. It's going to be a little bit easier, have a little bit more room. Try a pair of needle nose because I just can't quite get my hand in there. There we go. Went right on that way. And now we'll get the air valve. And again, make sure your filter's straight up in the air on this side. sure your wires are out of the way. You're just going to kind of line that up. And this is a pain, by the way. This is not an easy, it looks like it's easy, but it's not really easy because everything is kind of hitting and in the way. It has to be lined up just right. There it goes. You'll feel it kind of snap. So there, now the bracket can go right on. We can put the bolts in. Everything's kind of tucked up out of the way. It's one of those things that you kind of fight for a little bit and then all of a sudden it goes right on. Oh, don't know what I did with my socket. So get your bolts started for the bracket. And if you remember, that hard one was that one down in the corner. So if you can't reach them, a lot of times you can put the bolt on the socket and just kind of reach it in there like a finger. If the bolt won't stay on there, take a little bit of that silicone that you used for the throttle body, put a little dab of silicone in the bolt and it'll help it stick. Because trying to reach in there with your fingers on some of these is like impossible. So just put the bolt on the end of the socket and it'll go right in. Okay, so now that you got those, make sure you tighten them all up. We're almost home free. You're going to take your wire here. If you remember, it came up through this way. We had that little connector. Let me get this stuck in there. You got to kind of get everything from being stuck, but you had this little connector that went here. And I have this wire actually on the wrong side of that vacuum hose, so I got to pull that back off and do it over. But basically, you're going to put your little connector back in there and you're going to plug this on. So I'm going to stop the camera, I'm going to re-switch this around because I have the wire on the wrong side, and then I'll come back. Okay, I just had the wire stuck, it wasn't actually on the wrong side. So you just put that little connector through there, plug this on. Hear that little click, you know you're good. Kind of tuck that down out of the way. Make sure you leave enough room here for your gas line to pop back on. So that's that part. The next thing we do is up here you have this rear crankcase, engine crankcase breather. That was hooked to the airbox as well. What we're going to do on there is in the kit you get a brass nipple and another air filter. You're just going to kind of put that all together. Again, we have a clamp. I like to tighten this up, get it close while it's out here versus trying to do it in there. That just more or less pushes on there. Tighten your clamp up. And it just tucks down in there like that. I didn't even disconnect the zip tie from the factory tube. There was no need to, so you don't have to do anything there. I really didn't even disconnect any of these zip ties on anything. The only thing we have to worry about is the fuel tuner. You know, when we bring that back here, you want to make sure that's out of the way of everything. But I didn't disconnect anything at all. So what we're going to do is just kind of pop some of these wires back where they need to go. Get everything, make sure the cables clutch cable and everything, make sure it's out of the way of the throttle when you work the throttle, that it's not hitting on there. That is something that you can kind of zip tie onto the torque tube to keep it away from there. You can zip tie it up here onto the frame rail. That's generally where I like to put it. So you just, take your zip tie, go around everything. And hold that clutch cable, make sure it's not on your throttle cable. Because now's the time. You can look in here, you can see how everything is, you can see where everything's working. Nothing's hitting in the way, you're in good shape. That's real important. The more stuff you put on, if you make a mistake, the more stuff you have to take off. So you don't want to do it then, you want to do it now. This wire was clipped on this little thing up here. So that's out of the way. All this stuff's good. You tightened your hoses up. Your vacuums are on. Everything's good to go there. So the next thing, we'll put the ignition harness and the coils back on. Just plug this back in. Okay. Your coil, one wire went here. The other wire went up on that connector, up on the throttle body. If you remember, that's the one we had trouble when it was sticking, pulling it out. This little air breather will just kind of tuck up there like perfect, right out of the way. I have to finagle it a little bit just to get this bracket on there, but it goes right in. Again, I put the bolt in the socket, kind of reach it in there. Just going to tighten those up now. Okay, so that's pretty much everything. You're going to put your coil wires back on. Hopefully you remembered where they went. Rear cylinder on the top. Push those on till they kind of connect. Just kind of tuck them out of the way. You can pop your cheese wedge back on now. You've double checked all the wiring. Make sure everything's tucked up. Make sure everything's connected. So last thing is really to put the filters on. On the filters, you have a long one and you have a short one. See, long and short. The way they're kind of made to go is if you read the Lloyds name, the Lloyds name is like horizontal to the ground. You don't want it like that. It's kind of made to go horizontal. The long one goes on the left side and the short one goes on the right side. Now the one thing you want to kind of do when you're doing this is position this clamp so you can get it off. You don't want to be putting the clamp on like tightening up here because the gas tank's going to be on there. You're not going to be able to do it. So make sure you kind of put this on so that you can get to this clamp. Now that may mean like if I'm trying to put it on, let me show you here. If I'm trying to put this on like that, it may mean you have to take the clamp off and spin it around. You may have to flip it around this way to get it at a different angle. It's however you want to do it, whatever's easy for you to do that. So you just kind of slip that on, and again, make sure nothing's in the way. Now this way, it's going to be really hard to get that clamp right there. So what we're going to do, we're going to take it off and spin the clamp around. So now the clamp's in the bottom, and you'll see it's going to be much easier to do. Make sure your clamp is, out on the end here. Doesn't give you a whole lot of room here. Pull this back down so I can get in there a little bit. That breather from the idle air is really close right there, so it's kind of tight. So you just gotta finagle that around a little bit right there. Clamp sliding off. Make sure when you do this, like mine just slid off a little bit, make sure when you're tightening it, you're not tightening and it's sliding off. Make sure it holds on there, okay? So make sure you get that tight. Okay, and we just go around and do the other side. Like I say, keep in mind the Lloyds logos should be kind of parallel with the ground. That way it'll help you kind of get an idea of where to twist those. Okay, that's pretty much it. You're pretty much done. Next thing we'll do is we'll pop the gas tank back on and start hooking the seat up and doing all that. But that is basically installing your torque tubes. Again, double check that's okay, nothing hidden there. You're going to pop your cheese wedges back on once you get the gas tank. So we'll get that part going and we'll show you how to do that. Okay, so we just put the gas tank on. You basically put it on the same way it came off. Just kind of lift it, set it down, slide it on there. We hooked up our vacuum lines here. We hooked up the electrical connector under there. So now the only thing really we have left to do is tighten up, or put on the fuel line and tighten the bolts. So the fuel line is real easy. If you remember, when we took it apart, these green clips, what you have to do when you take it apart is you squeeze. There's a clip there and a clip here. You have to squeeze those together and then it pops off. If you remember, I said it has that little click. Where you put it on, you do it the same way. You just push it on and it'll click. Hear that click? Give it a tug, make sure it's on. Now the next thing you want to do at this point is you want to turn the key on, and that will turn the fuel pump on, and you want to make sure you don't have any leaks. make sure, you know, like I say, everything, obviously the engine's still cool, but you want to make sure the engine's cool. You just turn your fuel pump on. You can hear it turn on. It pressurizes the system, and you can double check for any leaks here, any leaks up underneath, anything you might have done wrong. If everything's good, and it should be, just shut that stuff off. And now we're going to finish tightening up the bolts for the gas tank. I like to tighten them last because if you had a problem, you would just go and, you know, pull it off. You wouldn't have to go and unbolt everything. So we just tighten the bolts up. Now on this part, you have these little rubber caps, and if you see, they just have these little catches right here, and here. You just want to kind of pop that on, and I kind of spread it a little bit and make sure that it goes on. You'll feel it just kind of snap on, and then it goes on there, and you're good to go. So you do the same thing on the other one, on the other side. So now we have our fuel tuner. So we have the wires all routed, so we're going to tuck this one down underneath the seat here, is where that's going to go for right now. So the last thing you really have to do is you just hook up the wire onto the ground wire. So just, you know, loosen your ground screw. And you can put that ground wherever you have a chassis ground. It doesn't have to go here. This is the best spot for it, and it's also kind of the easiest because it's just right here. Make sure you tighten that up. And that's basically all there is to it. Once you power the bike up, you should see your lights turn on to tell you that, yeah, everything's hooked up right. So once you do that, you want to set this to whatever settings. You have to read in the instruction book on what your particular setting is. There isn't a certain one. There are certain ones if you have cams, certain ones if you have air filter, exhaust, all different things. So you would set this up however you want. So basically, you know, that's going to tuck in there. What I recommend is kind of leave this hang out here for right now. Put your seat on, ride the bike, get a feel for how everything works. That way this is out here so you can tune it. Once you get this set where you want it to be, then you can tuck it in once you know it's right. But that's what I say. Just kind of leave this hanging out so you can get to it without taking your seat on and off every time. So once you tuck that in there, you're just going to take your seat. You know, you might want to zip tie this all up together once it's on there. Take your seat, put your seat on, put your bolts in, put your side covers back on, and you should be all set. Again, read the instruction books for the settings on the idle air valve. The basic setting is when you have it and you screw it all the way in. Take your screw, screw it all the way in, and then 3.5 to 4 turns out is the starting spot. And then read the directions from there on what problems you may have and how to correct those. So that basically is how you put torque tubes on a steel frame Victory. Thanks for watching.